Okay, guys. So we've got the live stream going. There's no one watching at the moment, so although we need to rush into it while the pizzas come up. Mostly familiar faces, so that's good. We don't have plenty of pizza, so there was a much bigger audience intended to physically attend and actually shown up, which is always good. So please grab yourself some pizza while we get ready to go. Plenty of cold drinks in the fridge, one right after another. Someone really on catering here? Thank you. Here's the office. That's fine, it's on the delay. No, get something
Security camera. Yeah. And steal the jewelry.
Watching at the moment. Got one viewer. Hello to one viewer. He says hello. Yeah. Oh shit. Say.
Awesome.
White ladies.
The late stream.
For me, I change, shop and change. If it's anything new, like registration or something, needs to be able to do it and we bottle stuff.
Up to you.
Oh, yeah.
We've got two viewers now. You present?
No, Scott. My colleague's coming up.
The moment.
Many things. Yeah, right. Sounds interesting.
Too many things. We were just checking freestyles.
Oh, yeah, nice.
Into yeah, hopefully freestyle data science. Well, actually, we were science. Looking at that's-based machine learning. Yeah, so full disclosure, I don't know the AWS the ML stuff has come out. All right, guys, we're going to make a start here in a second. Just going to try and figure out why our other host can't get onto this. He's over at the How do you know? Yeah, right. Yeah, we're being about chicks along. Yeah. Don't use it too much. Okay. I help them.
Couple weeks.
Everywhere. What did you remember? We live in the cloud.
That's our website, it's very basic.
Yeah.
And it's been nothing.
Yeah, well, I don't care.
Basically what John Holland knows, he basically spent 2 weeks on things that.
Okay, so usual technical challenges, trying to invite someone into the meetup so they can actually share their desktop, which is not great. All right, we'll sort that out later.
Why the, what's your name?
Okay, so let's make a start. Thanks a lot for coming along to tonight's session. Obviously, all got heaps of beer, which is good. We're going to do a little run through of what's happened in Azure since our last meetup last month. Been a pretty quiet month, actually. I think with the big announcements that came out of Build and Ignite in the States in May. I think the teams have been heads down, probably getting ready for holidays through the middle of the year in North America. But still some interesting stuff. So let's talk a little bit about preview. So Data Factory, which is kind of ETL offering in the cloud from Microsoft, added in the capability to import data out of a range of different data sources. So you can do MySQL, DB2, Sybase, Postgres, and Teradata. That's on top of obviously SQL Server, which would have been the first item that we've seen there. So in August, we're planning on having someone come in and talk about SSIS in the context of Azure and what that means for data and importing data into Azure. So the more modern versions of SQL Server and SSIS have got capability to interact with all the data services that are gradually being built out inside of Azure. So that's a preview service that's now available for Data Factory. Generally available. Premium storage finally available in Australia, but only in one region. So Australia East, which is here in New South Wales, Australia South East, which is down in Vic, doesn't currently have it. Premium storage is good because it unlocks the highest speed VM D series that you've got access to. So you now got local high speed disk and also storage, blob storage based high speed disk as well. So you can start to do striping, and I think if you stripe correctly, you get up to over 50,000 IOPS out of any blobs that are stored down in premium storage. We have seen some challenges in backing up VMs that have got premium storage attached to them. I don't know where we got to with that. Some of the guys in the Cloud Vic team had some challenges backing up VMs, so certainly something to be aware of if you use that. But if you've got high performing or apps that require high performing disk, that's the way you're going to be doing it in Azure at the moment. CDN. So CDN's added the ability to have custom origins. So you now no longer have to necessarily host your content in Azure, either in a website or blob storage. The endpoint doesn't have to be in Azure. So you could theoretically, I'm going to commit sacrilege here and say this, you could theoretically put your content in an S3 bucket if you wanted to, and then put the Azure CDN over the top of that. Question why you would do that if you've got access to CloudFront, but that option is there if you want to use it. Or if you've got an on-prem data center that you actually want to leverage CDN capabilities for, you can now do that as well. And that's kind of Microsoft extending their capability. So Traffic Manager, which is the geo-available DNS routing setup, similar to Route 53 in AWS, already has the ability to have custom endpoints that are not hosted in Azure. So you can do things like have a primary site for your web services hosted in your on-prem data center, put Traffic Manager over the top of it, and have the failover actually be into an environment inside of Azure if you wanted to, or vice versa, in fact, if you wanted to do that and make Azure your primary and have on-prem as a secondary, or AWS, if in fact that's what you wanted to do. Media services have introduced adaptive shift rate and filtering. So filtering is interesting because it's slowly starting to introduce capabilities around things like doing subtitling in video streams that you put up. An adaptive bit rate, we've kind of already had that previously with HLS, but this is about doing adaptive bit rate over just plain HTTP, so you don't have to worry about using streaming protocols and all that fun stuff. That's kind of one of the more hidden services inside of Azure. Probably not a lot of people get their hands dirty with that, and it is actually very deep. Media businesses I know are very interested in it, and it's been used at scale for things like World Cup and Olympics. So it can scale to hundreds of thousands of concurrent users. I expect we'll probably see more innovation in that space as well. They're one of the more proactive teams in terms of announcing what they're doing as well, which is good. Store Simple. Store Simple is a physical appliance that you install down in an on-prem environment, provides you with standard disk share locally with high-speed disk as a cache, and then has the ability to take cold storage and push that off to Azure Blob Storage. The release of Store Simple ironically reintroduces the ability to back up to non-Azure based targets. So you can now do things like AWS, S3 and Glacier as well, which when Microsoft acquired Store Simple was actually built into the appliance at that point. So Microsoft's gone back and reintroduced that capability. That's just in the 8000 series Store Simple appliances, which are pretty new. They're only released in the last 6 months or so. The older 5000 and 7000 series Store Simple devices don't have that capability at the moment. And then the last one, Visual Studio Online, TFS in the cloud, however you like to call it, is now available in Australia. When you create a new tenant, you can choose to either create it in North America, West Europe, or in Australia. If you've got a tenant in one of the other geographies, you can actually apply to Microsoft support to get it moved into the Australian geography if you want to. My personal take on that is if you've got data sovereignty issues or performance issues with it being hosted in North America, then it's probably worthwhile moving it to Australia. What you will lose if you move it out of North America is you'll probably lose early access to the new features as they roll out, because they'll generally roll out in the North American tenant first. As we're starting to see, because of the number of geographies and regions that Azure now runs in, it takes a period of time for new features to roll out through those regions, in the same way that it does with AWS. There's an announcement, generally it goes into North America first, it's trialled there for a while, and then once it's been embedded in, it then rolls out gradually over time to other regions. And we're seeing that even with the rollout of Azure just generally in Australia. We don't have all of the features that are generally available in North America, but not yet available physically down in Australia. So premium storage is a key example of that. Till recently, we had no premium storage available anywhere in Australia, and we still don't have it in all of the regions in Australia. Announcements. Go the right way on this deck. Who uses PowerShell to look after Azure at the moment? Anybody? So you've probably been used to, over the last year or so, having to use the Azure Switch Mode commandlet, which allows you to switch between service management and resource manager. Later this year, Switch Azure Mode will actually go away, and that's because the concept of service management will actually eventually go away, as will the version 1 portal, which we've all grown to love, that nice white and blue portal that a lot of people seem to prefer over the new one that's been made available. And that's mainly because where Azure is going from an infrastructure as a service offering standpoint and a PaaS standpoint is leveraging new capabilities brought about by a resource manager. I might do a quick demo at the end of the session if anyone's interested to see what the differences are. But if you're not looking at Resource Manager today and you're not using the Azure Resource Manager mode when you use commandlets, you probably need to start investing time in that space, because that will be the only way to manage Azure, probably within the next 12 months, I would imagine. So you're not going to see much new features built out on the existing portal, because all the teams are being told to build those features first for the preview portal, and that's where they're actually landing first. So that's going to be a big one, because that undoes most people when they start using PowerShell. So that's pretty much it tonight. As I said, there's light on. Tonight we're going to have Scott Scovell, one of my colleagues from Kloud Solutions, going to talk about the Azure App Service. Before we get started and give Scott a chance to finish eating his pizza, anyone got any questions about anything we've talked about, or anything in general about Azure they'd like answers to? Just want more pizza? No? you like to know something about AWS, perhaps? Wrong user group? No. All right. No. Okay. All right. That's fine. Yeah. All right. So we're just gonna. I just need to figure out with Scott how we can get him into this broadcast so that our wonderful 5 viewers who've been attending this out on the internet can actually see that. Let's just see if anyone's got any Q&A questions from the internet. So if anyone out there on the internet's got any questions, please just use the Q&A box if you've got access to it to post the messages while I figure this out. No.
Simon, you said
Yep.
Azure Traffic Manager
Yes.
for handling switching application between primary and VR sites.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's more than just a fancy DNS, it actually handles proper switching and things like that. So you create the endpoint in Azure and it's route one way most of the time and
So
route the other
you
way.
can create multiple profiles to do either least latency routing based on physical location. So it is all DNS based.
Right.
It's not a load balancer per se, but it's the same as Route 53 in that it uses health probes to understand the health of the target. And if the target responds as being unhealthy, it'll actually dynamically update DNS to route traffic to somewhere else on the internet.
What's the complexity in factoring those health rules? You like actual?
They're very basic. Yeah, they're not overly complicated. Yeah, it's designed really, I guess, for web services to be made redundantly available. It doesn't really do anything beyond HTTP.
So you can't do like synthetic transactions or anything like that?
Not really, no. Yeah, but you've been invited. Apologies, guys. So we've done this precisely 3 times now, and each time I have different problems getting the person in to actually do the presentation.
Just send me the courseware, so I know.
So I invited this user. I have no idea why. Show you. Yeah, so we invited you.
I'm with you. Yeah, I did try.
Microsoft Learning.
That's fine.
By the time they publish courseware and those, all of that.
Almost there, hopefully.
One.
See how many people we lost in the feed in the meantime.
So they actually.
Turned out in a fleet.
Yeah.
Content.
Oh, still got 4 viewers. Well, thanks for staying with us. There we are. Good.
So that's most of the document. Right. This week I was supposed to be giving all JDE. It doesn't count. It's a draft stuff this week. That's next week. Which is why I can make the meeting. It's online.
Okay, good. There we are. Excellent. Share this.
No. It'll be easy. Moving this talk. What's that kind of integration? Look. This integration engine is we try to do this. What's supposed to go ahead? The integration system from database. Get it in. Work on it.
Yeah, you want to do it through a screen?
And the base factory stuff is about being able to import and manipulate data through from
If
different.
that's not this talk.
All right, so we can now see your desktop. All right, finally, next time. Okay, note to self, next time just email the link to everyone. So we need to change that over as well so everyone else can see what's going on.
The other side is that.
I've just been test closer.
Well spotted.
Who needs technology, hey? Anyone here know a good computer specialist?
Should have brought my son.
Yeah, I'll come down and get you.
Which I have no database. We have the backend system. Don't worry about it.
That looks good. Okay, thank you for persisting with us while we get that sorted.
So your presenter view on your screen. So if you maybe just duplicate your screen. There we are.
Yeah.
Cool.
How about that?
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, guys. My name's Scott Scovell. I'm a cloud integration specialist at Kloud. Tonight, I'm going to walk us through a new set of services that Azure has stood up. Some are rebranded, some are new to the platform, and these are the Azure App Services. And then we'll take a closer look at one of those offerings, which is the Logic Apps. So, who's heard of Azure App Services before? Awesome. Who's played with them? Yeah. Okay. And which variety have you played with?
Mostly just websites at this stage.
Websites?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, Azure Websites was the previous offering. The PaaS offering for web services. In that umbrella, as we'll see, of Azure App Services, then we'll be talking about Azure Web Apps. So wherever you hear Azure Web Apps, that's the rebranding of Azure websites, which we'll see. So there's a couple of other members of that group too. So we'll be introducing the app services and then taking a look at Logic Apps, but most of this presentation will be this walkthrough. And the demo I've got is around Logic Apps, which is our, think of it as some integration as a service, workflow as a service in the cloud, although it's not deep in any of those areas just yet, but we'll have a look at some of the scenarios that we might use. The scenario that we're going to walk through is a a very typical one these days. Our organisation has gone out and bought some SaaS products. They've got Salesforce managing their customers and their account details, and IT have stood up Office 365, and in there they're saying, okay, we've got to manage all our documents and use Office 365 platform for a whole bunch of stuff. So the challenge is, how do we connect these two worlds that are popped up in our organisation? And we'll walk through that scenario. So we'll walk from scratch, and I'll connect Salesforce and Office 365 during the demo. So today, the previous key application services in Azure is around websites, which I mentioned before. It's our PaaS offering where we can run all our web-based workloads, our websites, our web APIs, those sorts of things. We have mobile services. Who's used mobile services before? No? So there was a set of services that came through V1, and they were giving us some back-end APIs for our mobile app developments that we might want to access some persistent storage like SQL Azure on the back end. We might want to leverage push notifications out to Android, iOS, mobile, Windows mobile platforms. So sort of wrapping up a bunch of services for us that we could back our mobile app development very quickly instead of us having to write all that up. The other set of application services was this thing called BizTalk services, and this was our integration services running up in Azure. So we had things like we could stand up some B2B type businesses, fronting, EDIFACT and X12 type messaging, then connect to our on-premise services through this suite called BizTalk services. So what Microsoft has released in April, around the April timeframe this year, is one integrated offering for all those services. So there's a rebranding going on, but they've delivered some new functionality as well. So websites now become web apps, and that's a rebranding of the existing service. So we've just, you'll notice when you start playing with it, you'll still see URLs which point to Azure websites and all those sorts of things. So a lot of the undercover stuff is all the same. We're just going to rebrand it, call it web apps, and deliver that functionality. Mobile apps is a reimagining of the mobile services. So they've taken the functionality from mobile services and then put it into this new model, this API model, and called it mobile apps. API apps are a specialized web app where we can run our web APIs and put forward a bunch of RESTful APIs in a managed PaaS offering now in Azure. And we get additional hybrid connections, API management opportunities as well with that offering. So that's a new guy, the API apps, and Logic Apps is a new guy on the block as well. And this is really version 1 of Microsoft's attempt to put workflow or integration into Azure as well. So we'll have a look at some of the Logic Apps. And BizTalk services kind of rolls into Logic Apps and APIs apps as well. And we'll see how that sort of lands. So BizTalk services is the one that's probably taken on the most change. So before we were consuming it in a very integration specific, BizTalk specific way with concepts like the IA bridges and a few of those. Logic Apps sort of reimagines that whole workflow. So we're starting from scratch. Okay, so web apps, as I mentioned before, everything that you had before in Azure websites, you have in Azure web apps. So it's a rebranding of that technology. So we can run our .NET, our Node, our Java, PHP, all our web workloads the way we did before. We get access to back-end services like web jobs for running long-running processes, cleanup jobs, maintenance, those sorts of things. Integration with our ALM tools, and also all our load balancing autoscales that we expect from that web PaaS offering. So rebranding Azure websites into web apps. The mobile apps we're taking the functionality from mobile services that we used to use, and then we're reimagining that into this thing called mobile apps. So interesting enough, it runs under Azure websites as a web app, sort of under the covers. So we're getting web jobs, we're getting ALM integration, auto balancing, all those PaaS stuff that we got from our web apps. But now all the mobile services functionality that we used, push notifications, backend data stores, those sorts of things are all now exposed as APIs running in that, that app container that is now mobile apps. So custom APIs, so these API apps, so this is sort of a specialized web workload, if you like. So now we can go and create our web APIs, RESTful or otherwise, and put them into this ecosystem. We've got the ability to also draw upon a whole bunch of pre-built API apps for us. So we're starting to see this ecosystem in a marketplace where we can leverage bits and pieces or microservices that you might have heard it bandied about to compose our applications in a more granular fashion. So an API app will be useful in, you'll be adopting other people's APIs app. Microsoft made a whole bunch of API apps. Other vendors will be creating custom API apps and publish them in the marketplace for you to consume. And of course, we can create our own API apps and make them available. So that marketplace, is anyone using or have used the marketplace on Azure? So who's playing around with the preview portal in Azure?
I did the other day.
Yeah, so as Simon said, it's well worth your time now to start investing in that preview portal. The old portal is going away in a sort of a 12-month time frame, but the new portal is where all the investment's being made, and that's where all the functionality is being delivered to first. So things like the marketplace, where we can go in and we can buy pre-canned or provision pre-canned, pre-templated environments and services and APIs as well, and API connectors. So it's where a place that we can go through and only available in that preview portal to access some of this functionality. All worth getting into.
Is the Salesforce connector that you can use in the Logic apps, is that an API app in itself, or is it something different?
Yeah, correct. So the question is the Salesforce connector. So this is an example of where another vendor has come in and developed an API for you, and you can then just consume that, spin up an instance of that, and use it within your solution. That is exactly this. Yeah, it's a custom API app written by another vendor, and they've just packaged it into the marketplace for you. That other vendor being Microsoft. The marketplace at the moment is not open to the public, but that's coming in the next sort of 3 months, 6 month life cycle. That marketplace is also being offered up for enterprise as well. So development teams can develop their API. So let's say you're part of a team that's in charge of this ERP system. You can create your little custom API app, package it up, put it into the enterprise marketplace, not the public marketplace. So only your organization can see that. And then the wider organization can consume your API that way. So the marketplace has a big role in this ecosystem. So the other kid on the block was the Logic apps. And this is where we're seeing that workflow automation type service pop in. Where this guy differs from the other models we've seen is it's a reimagination of workflow. So we're coming up with a new workflow definition language under the covers based on tracing. We have a graphical designer in the preview portal, not the existing one, but in the preview portal where we can access this. So it's all drag and drop, consume this, build that. Very quick to develop these Logic apps and deploy them. We have dozens of pre-built templates. So the templates in there are these custom API apps that other vendors have put through, but also patterns as well. So we might create a logic app that connects sort of Salesforce to SharePoint Online, and then what we'll do is we'll take that, package it as a template, and then we'll pop that in the marketplace. And here's a template that we want all our developer teams to spin up when they're doing that, and they'll just punch in a different configuration in terms of what entities they pull out of Salesforce and where they go when they go into SharePoint Online, for instance, right? So we have this ability to build templates of our logical apps as well. All right. The logic apps in that last point too. So we can use out of the box APIs from the marketplace, but we can also bring in our own custom APIs. So if there's not a connector in the box or a template in the box that we can use, we can always code our own API, upload that, deploy that into Azure, and then use that within our logic apps as well. We'll see an example of that in our demo. So these pre-canned connectors that I've been talking about, this is version 1. So as you can see, there's quite a decent amount of connectors that Microsoft has deployed itself for us to go away and compose our applications with. We've got application-based connectors, such as those to Salesforce, SAP, Box, and I think at last count there was sort of 50 plus different SaaS applications. We have protocol adapters that we can draw upon, and these are things like SMTP or POP3, FTP. So you can expose your RESTful API as a custom API app in Azure now, and then it will go and do the protocol translation into FTP and go and do the FTP bits. You know, so if you can imagine a get file or list directory, you can expose that in HTTP RESTful endpoints, and then this connector will do all that protocol translation for you. So you can quickly build your applications together and not have to go and get down deep into these different protocols. BizTalk Services sort of pops its head back out. So previously, it was a real product-centric or domain-centric knowledge base. You really need to come from the BizTalk server side to understand what the original BizTalk Services was about and how we would deal with concepts such as EIA bridges and pipelines and maps and all those sorts of things. Russell's smiling.
Oh, yeah.
So what they've been reimagined now as APIs. All right, so they've been delivered as custom APIs in this marketplace. So if we want to go and do a map, transform an XML document from one format to the other, we would stand up an API for that. And this is the concept of that microservices architecture. If we want to parse an X12 file message that we get, we would stand up an API to do that. And then we would compose our application from all these different APIs that we're standing up. And there's heaps more in there, so I leave it to you to go and explore the marketplace in the preview portal. Okay, so the preview portal, if you don't know how to get to it, you'll be prompted when you're in the old portal, and you'll probably be prompted a lot more these days because they're trying to wean everyone off. But instead of going manage.windowsazure.com, you go portal.azure.com. Okay. Little picture game here. Can anyone tell me what we're about to do next? Any football fans? Come on, Andy. Who's this character?
Oh,
German footballer. Miroslav.
Close.
Miroslav Klose. So we're going to have a closer look at logic.
I've
been workshopping this joke.
We try the worst joke of the evening. I think I can beat that.
It's not the worst.
I get up already for this.
You should have pre-recorded that one, I reckon.
Okay, so Azure Logic Apps. Delving down into them a little bit more, we've got this concept of workflow or orchestration of these different API apps that we might be putting together within our business logic. So we've introduced the concepts of all these connectors that can talk to Salesforce, they can talk to an FTP server, they can do a whole bunch of weird and wonderful things. Where Logic Apps fits in that picture is how do we tie them all together to create our solution, right? So how do we take data every hour out of Salesforce and then go and FTP some sort of mapped reconciliation of that to this FTP server over on, system B. Logic Apps is about pulling all that together and defining how that workflow or orchestrating all those different applications within an application itself or an app service itself. Right? And we'll expose this service up on Azure as RESTful endpoints, and then we'll consume that service. Okay. So that's the concept of Logic Apps. Underneath the covers, the Logic App template or the workflow, if you like, is composed of 4 main bits and pieces. We've got parameters, obviously, for defining any inputs that are going to come in or runtime configuration that we might want to define. We've got this concept of a trigger. So something has to call our app. I mean, it's an API sitting out there. So do we want another application to come and call our app? Or do we want our app to be triggered itself? Right? Do we want to grab a connector and have that as the trigger? So a connector might be, I want to go out and look at that FTP server and pick up a file every hour. So that FTP connector is our trigger in our workflow app and our Logic App. Then we have a series of actors, and it's a bit hard to see here, we'll look at it in a bit more detail, but we'll drop different microservices or different app services onto our logic flow to implement our solution. So these actions that we put onto our template are our API apps, okay, or our web apps. So the apps that we want to call during our flow. So there are actions, and obviously actions have outputs, and those outputs are then presented to the next action item in the flow as an input, and then et cetera, right? It is version 1 at the moment, so we don't see a whole lot of flow control that we might be used to if we're doing a whole lot of workflow type related code at the moment. So we don't have decision shapes, we don't have looping shapes visually, right? We are pretty much a pipeline type model. Okay, so actor inputs and outputs. Having said that, we can do repeating actions. So if one of our API apps in our flow returns a set of data, then we can loop over that set, presenting each data item to the API app next in line. The way the apps sort of talking to one another through this definition language called Swagger. Has anyone come across Swagger as an API definition language? So it's a JSON-based definition. Think of it in the SOAP web services days. You had WSDL. Who's come across WSDL? A web service definition. It's a big XML document that sort of defines what your service is doing. Swagger is the similar sort of thing, but for a RESTful API. And the way the Logic App designer and the Logic App architecture works is that it's inferring the inputs and outputs of our actions based on these Swagger definitions of our API apps. As I said, it's JSON-based, and we have a very simple expression language we can use at the moment as we pass inputs to outputs and loop over those outputs and those sorts of things, which we'll get a bit of a feel for in the demo as well. So here's our 4 main parts of our Logic App as we look under the cover, right? So I mentioned we have got a graphical designer. So why am I showing you, sort of JSON looking stuff? So this is what's happening underneath the cover, and Azure in the preview portal is then giving us a graphical designer on top of that. But it helps us sort of get a concept of the 4 main parts. We've got the parameters, we've got their triggers, actions, and outputs. and we can grab this definition, and this is the definition that is our source code that we would go and put into our source code repository. This is the definition that's get deployed up into Azure when we're deploying into different environments. So drilling down onto parameters, we're not going to go too deep here in this, but just to understand why we're using parameters, we can have our input parameters. So when we're calling our API, we can define a set of parameters. Sorry, calling our logic apps as an API, we can define a set of parameters that we want to pass in. We can also have parameters that will span the life cycle of our app. So think like variables in our flow. So we can have those as well. We can do primitive types, and we can also do some complex types too, just as they're represented through JSON as well. Triggers, as I mentioned before, we can have our triggers going off a schedule, a recurring schedule. Hey, I've got some sort of batch job I want to run every night, every hour, every second. Or I might have a connector that's going to go off and do something. Maybe it's going to query SharePoint library for a bunch of documents in a certain status based on some metadata. And if something comes back to me, I will then pass it off into my logic app and go down the flow for those sorts of things, right? So we have frequencies and intervals. We've also got this concept of conditions, which gives us a little bit of flow control because we can define a condition to say, look, if I only get 2 documents, then don't trigger my flow. But if I get more than 2, then it passes the gate and goes through it, right? So very basic at the moment. Our actions, they're our individual API apps that we want to compose in our logic app. They're represented in the template display, different types. Again, conditions, which will mean it may be filtered out of that pipeline as it goes through. But then we're defining our inputs to that action as well. The repeating, which we'll look at, is okay, if the preceding app gives us a set of data, then let's define at what hierarchy in that data we're going to repeat on, and we'll call that action multiple times. So if we go and we're pulling out a set of customers from a database from the previous action, and we define each customer as the repeating item, then our API, or this action, sorry, will be called for each customer. Right? That's the definition of the repeating. We have a very basic expression language, so get another language to learn. It is very basic at the moment. So we can do a little bit of string manipulation. We have a few functions around summing and aggregation to support that notion of repeating. And there's a whole bunch of syntax based loosely on a JSON type expression language. There is not a lot of documentation at the moment on this expression language. It's evolving, and you'll do well to just keep up with the Azure blogs and posts from the actual product team who are putting out most of this stuff. Not a lot of it's landing in the official documentation. So, yeah, a little bit of trial and error at this stage. It is version 1. Okay, that's enough of me rambling. Let's have a look at this in action. Is there any questions before we go in? Yep.
Is there any indication of when version 2 might be?
So the question is, when's the next version? This is on a typical release cadence that's happening with the Azure team at the moment. So every, what would you say, 3 months, I think, you could expect a decent set of functionality to be delivered, but in between that, they may trickle out a few features to North American tenants and those sorts of things, right? So it might not be available when you stand this up, but the release cadence is very quick, and we don't tend to have these big drops in functionality. So April was the first release, but in end of May, we already had new functionality coming through, updates to the designer, fixing bugs. They're very, very active.
I was going to ask something just about the Salesforce connector.
Yep.
I'm just wondering about the reliability of that at the moment, whether that's actually really reliable to use, or is that something that should wait a little bit for?
Yeah, so definitely, this is all a preview services as well, so this is not production ready.
Okay.
How reliable is the connector? Yeah, I can't make a call on that.
All right, that's fine. I just
But
want.
it is early days and it is Red 1, right? And I have had a bit of trouble with the connectors, which I've socialised back
The way
with
I'm
the team.
doing it at the moment is I actually have a web job that actually goes and pulls an API within Salesforce itself.
Yep.
And it would be easier if I could just basically pass that data through this connector rather than having to try and.
Yep, this is definitely something that you should be looking at.
Yep.
Is it production ready? No, not yet.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, so here's our integration scenario. We have Salesforce. The businesses decided they'll run the credit card through and stand this service up. And we've got another part of the business that's using Office 365 and SharePoint Online, storing all our documents and legal assets about those customers. So the IT departments now has to connect these two up, right? So different parts of the organisation are going off and bringing all these new systems into the business, and it's our job to make sure that they're talking. So what we would typically go and do is we would look at our problem. So we've got Salesforce on one end, and we've got SharePoint on the other side. Let's go to the marketplace and have a look at what's out of the box. Right, so anything that we don't have to do ourselves is going to be great. So we go to the marketplace and look up some Salesforce connectors. We then look at our targets, go to SharePoint Online, same sort of thing. Let's go and look at SharePoint Online connectors and go evaluate those. What are we doing in the middle of those? So we might want to do some transformation. We might want to run some business rules. So let's go off and find out what those requirements are. Can they be met by something out of the box, or do we need to stand up something ourselves? And that's what we'll be doing. We'll be composing a group of these services, a Salesforce connector and a couple of custom APIs, and composing them in our Logic app and then running them so that when something happens in Salesforce, runs through our business rules, and we end up with something going to SharePoint Online.
I think you might have lost the video feed from your machine. It's still showing a slide from a while back. So people will be hearing you and they'll be wondering what you're talking about.
And ironically, it's stuck on the joke too.
Yeah, that's a shame. Yeah. Let's just have a quick. Are you going to swap over?
I'm just about to swap out. So we're going to have customers in Salesforce, which in Salesforce land are called accounts. So that's the sort of the entity we're dealing with. When an account changes or a new account is created, we want our Logic app to be triggered. And then we want to call a business rule that says, okay, what account is this that has changed? Is it a type customer? So are they a customer of ours, or is it a partner account? And if it is a customer account, we want a folder in a SharePoint library in Office 365 to be created for that particular account in the customer's document library. And if it's a partner, we want a folder in the partner document library. So that's the scenario we're going to wire up in this demo.
So let's pull up that demo screen so hopefully people can just that's good. Just back online. Yeah, just so that people that are going to watch the video later can actually get some idea of what the demo is going to pertain to. So I think Scott kind of covered that in his description prior to this point, but we're going to go ahead and do a demo on that. So you're going to have to probably duplicate your screen. It's going to be the easiest thing to do. Alrighty. Okay, good. So we've gone through the problem statement. The first thing we should be doing is going to the Azure portal. And for those who haven't seen it, this is who's taking over. This is the preview Azure portal that I'm talking about. Okay, this is the new portal that all the investment's going into, and it's at portal.azure.com. So
On this portal, I won't go into the portal too much. I'll leave that for you to investigate. But the first part of our problem, or to solve the first part of the solution to our problem, is to go to the marketplace and let's have a look what's available to us out of the box that we can use. So on here we have a marketplace that I'll go into, and this is where we might find a whole bunch of different things. That's pretty legible. We can find compute. So here's a whole bunch of virtual machine templates we may want to go and stand up. We can do the same thing for web apps that other vendors might have put forward. Different patterns like a WordPress site or something like that. So this is the role of the marketplace. Yeah.
This is resources, and are they actually resource templates?
Yes.
These marketplace ones?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that comes back to that part about learn to work with the new portal and learn about Azure Resource Manager, because it's going to be the way that this stuff gets done in the future.
That's the only way that this is delivered. So the old version 1 of IaaS has been pushed across into there. So what we want to look at is our API apps. So you can see here we've got web apps, mobile apps, API apps, logic apps. So these are the templates and the connectors that are available in the marketplace for us. So if we go to API apps, we've got this little search pane, and we say, show me what I've got available for SharePoint, for Salesforce, and it says, okay, we have a Salesforce connector here. The vendor is Microsoft. We'll see other vendors in due course. And then it can tell me a little bit about this connector. So I mentioned before, we're interested in the account entity. So we can see here in this description language that account entity, well, they've changed it on me, okay. The account entity
Was listed there.
was listed. What have they done?
The top row, top line says Salesforce connector.
Okay, accounts, leads, contacts. Okay, so here's all the entities that this connector supported, right? Which is not a great deal if anyone's familiar with SharePoint. So SharePoint with Salesforce. This is the evaluation phase. Is this suitable for our needs out of the box, or do we need to go off and build something ourselves? We want accounts, so off we go.
It's a bit unclear. It's such as, which implies there might be other ones.
Yeah, correct. And if you're familiar with Salesforce too, we can always just query the entities using Salesforce querying language, right? Which is the query entity file. So if I want to go and use this Salesforce connector, I'll go create. And that's going to then prompt us with a whole bunch of input parameters for that particular API app. It says, okay, I'm going to provision one of these for you. I want to know a name, and then here are the package settings. So here are the inputs that need to go through. Here are the entities that you're allowed to support. So we can see accounts, one of them. If I wanted to restrict this just to account, I could then take the rest out. So if I'm deploying this to different teams within the organization, I can specify that this custom API is just for retrieving accounts, right? But I want them to go off and start hitting leads and cases and that
So
sort of
it
thing.
doesn't support custom objects. Salesforce custom objects at the moment.
At the moment, these are the entities that's supported, yeah.
Can you create new?
Can we create new so only these entities, right? So we can't go and create new objects. If we're going to pull objects out, they have to fit one of those models, yeah, at this stage.
It's not, I think the question was really about can you create new objects inside of Salesforce using these connectors?
Like if you can create the.
If they're part of this model, so if it's a new account, yes, a new lead. But if it's an object that's not supported by one of these entities, then yeah, we can't go and create an instance of that entity. So yeah. Okay. The other things that are of note here is this thing called App Service Plan. So each of our apps come with a, they run different resources, they have different costs, all those sorts of things. So when we're creating instances of these apps, we don't want to manage them at the app level, at the microservice level, right? We want to have a concept of, okay, we need some sort of logical container start managing all these different apps that we're composing into our solution. And service plans help us manage that sort of thing. So you can see I've got a service plan. Because I can play around with that. So I've got a service plan already existing. And the type of things that it asks us on the service plan. If I can bring it up. No, it's not available. I already tried it.
I think you're just choosing, is this the one, just go or create?
Am I? Oh, sorry. Actually, we won't walk through that, but I'll show you the one that I did create. Right? Just repeating the same thing. So, pricing tier for this particular app. So, you know, what do I anticipate the load on this app is, and how do I want to map that to a particular size instance I want to provision? Do I want it to be a sort of one core with almost 2 gig? Do I want to go up to a premium, couple of cores? If I hit this button and go to view all, I can sort of vertically scale that instance that I'm going to create. Okay, and I've got a whole bunch of different options. It's quite nice because it's showing me the attributes of those, how much disk I've got, how far I can scale it out. This one, I can scale out to 20 instances and have load balancing across 20 instances with this particular API. All the way down to this guy down here, which is a free version with shared resource hosting, those sorts of things, right? Might be suitable for some dev work. So I'm assigning a pricing tier to this particular app or this API app.
Scotty, if you have several apps sharing the same plan, it's all bundled on the same VM and the same scaling rules and that sort of thing?
We can manage it from that. We'll have a look at resource group.
Right, okay.
And we can be doing things along there. But we also got the fine grained rules as well, because not all apps are going to be able to the same load. That sort of thing. So we've got this concept of a resource group. What subscription and location we want to run in. So that's the experience of going through and creating an instance of that API using the marketplace. I've done that before, but before we go away, let's have a look at our other requirement, which was SharePoint. So let's search for SharePoint, see what comes up in the marketplace. And here you can see we've got SharePoint Online connector and SharePoint Server connector, right? So we've got 2 connectors, one's for the on-premise version of SharePoint, and one is for the SharePoint as a service, the Office 365 version. So I want the Office 365 SharePoint Online. Tells me a little bit about it. Actually, this is what I wanted to show you before, that I got sidetracked with the whole entities. On each of our connectors, it shows us the support within a Logic app. And this one's saying we can use this connector either as a trigger up front or as an action within our flow. So not all connectors or API apps can actually act as a trigger, right? But they can act as an action. So that's important to have a look for as well. And you can see as this marketplace gets opened up for other vendors, we'll have all sorts of things like licensing and price and all that sort of stuff. Right? So that API economy that you might hear about, this is the marketplace for that.
What version of SharePoint Server?
Sorry?
What version of SharePoint on-prem?
I'm not sure actually.
Probably 2013, I would imagine.
If I click it, it might tell us. So we might have to go off to the actual documentation from the vendor to work that out.
So what's the social links? They're on all 3 that you've gone to.
To be honest, I haven't used those.
Probably just support channels.
To Google, yeah.
Tell a friend you're using it.
That's right.
I really like this.
Created an API using the SharePoint connector. It's over 5 stars.
So with our SharePoint Online connector, it sounds like it's suitable for what we need. But digging down into it, and if we go off to the documentation side, we'll find that actually it doesn't support the creation of folders within document library, at least at the moment. So it may in the future, but at the moment our requirement is we need to create folders within a particular document library. So even though we have a connector, it's in the marketplace, it actually doesn't meet our requirements, right? So we're not going to use that particular connector. So the option that we have now is to go and create a custom API and then deploy our code into it. So we want to create ASP.NET Web API. We'll implement our own connector to SharePoint Online to create the folder, and then we'll deploy that into our custom API. So the first part of our solution is to go up to the marketplace and find suitable candidates. We found one candidate that we can use out of the box. What I've done is I've just clicked on my resource group that I created earlier, because when we provision these things, they might take anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes to stand up. So I pre-baked my cake before I came in. And this is our resource view. And this is our logical container for managing all of our API apps. But also, you can see we've got this thing called a gateway in there, which is going to be the front door for our APIs. And we can assign different policies and different rules to that gateway if we go and put it, or if we go and then manage it under Azure API management, which we won't do today. But you can see we've got a few little assets to play with in building our solution here. Here's our logic app that we built before. So I've deployed 3 API apps, as we saw in our diagram at the bottom. I've got an out-of-the-box Salesforce connector, and this guy's spun up. I've got my operation, start, stop, all those sorts of things. Here's the URL.
Can you just flip to the Hangout for a second? Just because we've lost video feed again.
I've got Hangout management here. And what was you want me to do? There we go.
Yeah, it's just share your screen again. For some reason, it's not keeping your screen share going.
I think it thinks it is.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Blame the interwebs.
You are screen sharing. Shall I stop and start?
Yeah, just stop. We'll try again. Sorry, guys. Just want to make sure that so we've got 3 people watching at the moment, and also for anyone that wants to watch it in the future.
How about that? Is that look all right?
Why is it not showing me your picture?
It says it's sharing. Stop now.
Go to screen share. See the options. No, it doesn't like you. Why doesn't it like you?
That's it.
All right, let's just take back control again for a second.
Do you want to play that?
No, just pop back into it and we'll try again. Give you back control.
All right, one more time.
Yep.
Stop. You're presenting to everyone. Stop. If I flick screen there.
No.
That's what the language. Oh, you are presenting.
That's one that's good during screen share.
There we go. That was.
All right.
Oh.
Yep, I can see that now. That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah.
Jesus, that's a bit trippy.
Okay. We still got everyone.
Yeah.
Someone's on the floor.
Just to wake everybody up, help all those people that are epileptic. Just give them a couple of minutes to get off the floor.
Awesome. So in the right hand lathe is kind of what they're calling each of these little sections that pop up. You can see I've got an instance of the Salesforce connector that I spun up, and it's an API app. And here I can see what membership it is with resource group. But here's the URL of that API app. So this is the publicly accessible endpoint for my API. It shows me what pricing plan I'm under, and a whole bunch of other things. On the All Settings tab here, I can go through and look at some of the options that I get out of the box by hosting this API in this PaaS environment. Things like authentication. So I can go away and easily configure Azure Active Directory authentication with my API, right, just using this sort of service. I can do role-based authentication for management of this. So I can assign just particular departments within my organization to manage this API. So we've got a lot of things that we get just out of the box by going to the marketplace and grabbing this API connector. We'll come back to that in a minute, but I just wanted to quickly show you a few more attributes. So I've got 3 APIs, as I mentioned. I've got a business rules API, and this is an example of a custom API that I've created. So to do that, I've just gone from the portal. I want a new API app, and I've gone, go and get me a custom API. Okay, so I'm not using a pre-canned connector from another vendor. I'm creating an empty API app that I can then go and write my own code and deploy into. How many developers have we got here that write code? Cool, over half the audience, excellent. Because we're going to step into code now. So, crap.
Zoom it a bit.
Zoom it.
Zoom it.
Bottom right hand corner of, you can increase in Visual Studio and increase the font. Go back into Visual Studio. Bottom right hand corner.
You doing this?
Yep.
I was actually talking about the whole screen.
Sorry.
I'm just trying to show this. So I have a solution here, and in my solution I have created 2 custom APIs. So these are ASP.NET web APIs. The experience here is new project. Now this is using the Azure SDK 2.6 and above, right? And that's where we get all our project templates for our app services that I'm talking about. So here's my new project. You can see I've got something called mobile app sitting in here. But if we go and create an ASP.NET web application, you can see with that 2.6 version of the SDK, I've got an Azure API app project template that I can create. I've got a mobile app project template I can create. We can still create a bog standard web API version and then add the bits and pieces we need to go and deploy it into an Azure App Service. Okay. So if we have an existing web API that we've deployed, we can absolutely go and put this into this app service container and use it up there as well. The other thing you might notice is this little section down here. So if we're on Azure API app, it's building in those deployment configuration for us. If we're on a web API project template, we can add the deployment stuff in here. So we can say host in the cloud and host it in a web app service. Yep. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know, we've lost it again. I don't know, it must be something up with the feed tonight.
Yeah.
We're still stuck with your
so that's what I've done here to create 2 API, custom API apps. Let me go to my demo script to make sure I'm giving you the full value. All right, so let's walk through the business rules API. So the business rules,
Which version of Visual Studio do you know?
2013, 2015 is absolutely
2015.
This is actually 2013 Community Edition. I'm a big fan of the Community Edition. It's free.
Yeah, not available for commercial use though. Yeah.
But it's
For personal projects at home, absolutely okay, but not to be used for commercial
so I'm
purposes.
using Visual Studio 2013 Community Edition with update 4. So that's another thing, update 4 and above, and SDK, Azure SDK 2.6 and above. So here's my web API app, and I just show a couple of pertinent things with my business rules. So why have I got a business rules? This is something that's going to sit, it's an API that I want to sit between Salesforce and SharePoint Online. Salesforce are giving me a list of accounts, a list of customers. SharePoint wants something in document library type language, right?
Okay.
So I need to now map between a SharePoint account and a document library over in Salesforce account and a SharePoint document library. So to do that, I've just done the bog standard pattern in a web API. So I've created a model. The model is a document library, right? So I've just got two attributes. I want a document library URL, and that's the one that's going to be in SharePoint. And I want a folder name because that's the folder I want to create. So the job of the business rules API is to populate that information based on the inputs coming into it. So if I go now to show the controller, so I have a business rules controller in my API, and this is how I've defined my API. It's a get. I'm taking in an account type and an account name. And these two properties are coming out of Salesforce, of my account entity, right? And I'm just running some simple business rules. If the account type is of type customer, the document library that I want to create my folder in is going to be called customers. If it's a partner, the document library is going to be called partners, right? So it's a very simple business rule, but this is a sort of bit of custom logic that I've implemented in a web API that I'm going to deploy into a custom API app in Azure and use it in my logic app. All right, so I've created this. As any good developer would, we need to test it locally. So if we spin this up locally, it's just a web API. Right. There we go. All the same sort of testing tooling and everything. We can write unit tests. We can do a whole bunch of stuff on the web API, just as you would. The only difference is you're going to be deploying it into this Azure app environment, right? But here it is running locally, just to show you that it's an API. And also I want to just quickly show you what this Swagger thing is all about, right? So when I created my ASP.NET Web API project, the framework, the project template framework, has created a whole bunch of stuff in behind the scenes that supports defining that API as in Swagger, right? All right, so let's see if I can bring this up. So I've just gone my project /Swagger, and then that's brought up this Swagger UI console, right? And this is where I can see the definition of my API expressed in Swagger. So here's my business rules API. It has a thing called business rules. I have a get operation at that resource, so /API/business rules. If I click into that, then this is all done for me, right? I have a description of that particular service. So here's the model. I can expect a response with a status of 200, and I'm going to get a bit of JSON coming back looking like that, which is all great. I can even test it. So if I put in account type as it's a customer and account name as Acme, very original. This UI will actually go and call my service, and here's the response I got, response code 200, and here's the response, here's the response body saying document library folder name, and here's all the headers, right? So I can quickly test my API using this framework that's populated for me. So that's great. Built my UI, built my API, tested it locally, all's good. Let's quickly show you the SharePoint one, but it's the same pattern. So I created a Azure API project, called it SharePoint Online Connector. and gone through the same process. I could have shared this model, but I've just created a model in SharePoint Online, which is the same looking thing. It's a document library. And this time I want this as an input from my business rule. So if you can sort of map out in your head the way our logic app worked, we had Salesforce, business rule, SharePoint Online connector. So the business rule is outputting that JSON we saw, the document library structure. This guy's going to be accepting that structure. So I've just defined it in there. What's our controller look like? This particular guy, I've got two methods. I've got a get and a post on this particular resource, the document library controller resource. So the get is basically for a particular name of a document library. Go off, use the client-side object model to query and pull back a list of folders in the library. And the other one is the one I'm interested in, which is the post. So I'm going to give it an instance of that JSON structure that we saw before, and then it's going to go and create that in SharePoint. Tell me if it's successful or not. So I've created my two custom web APIs. I'm ready to deploy them into Azure.
That code within the try, is that something you'd have to read the documentation for the particular thing you're trying to connect to and write yourself?
Correct. This is the SharePoint specific code that I've implemented as a connector. Yeah. So it's not anything to do with custom APIs or anything like that, or Azure App Services or Azure API apps. This is purely the logic, the code that I need to write to go and connect to that resource and do whatever I need to do. So if I was writing a custom SQL connector, SQL Server connector, then this code would be the logic I'd need to open the connection and execute store procedure or whatever I wanted to do. Yeah. So that's what this code is.
Are there any, that's C#, are there any other language options?
Yep, so it's however you want to create your ASP.NET Web API. So if you want VB.NET, if you want, what are the other options? F#,
If you're Brave? Yeah, I don't think you need to create an API, web API.
I don't know if Brave is adequate.
I feel like functional rather than procedural. Program.
Yeah, I've done an F# project before, so I've got
Yes, got the scars, I can see it.
Yeah. Okay, so how do I deploy this? So the usual deployment experience with a ASP.NET Web API, right click, hit publish. So on my profile here, now this guy is going to be old, so I'm going to remove him. Now we're in the laps of the gods here. So what's my publishing target? Publish to web apps. I can publish to API apps, or I can bring in a publishing rule. So I want to go off to Azure API apps. Okay. Signed in as the wrong person. So sorry, bear with me for a moment. That's carried on from somewhere else. So I'm authenticating against Azure Active Directory for my subscription to make sure that I am indeed a service administrator and I have the right to deploy into that particular tenant. So I'm signed in now, and it's going to go away and look at my subscription and pull back a list of available API app services that I've deployed. And you can see I've got a bunch available now. Now it shows me the Salesforce connector, right? Because the Salesforce connector is just a custom API app that's written by another vendor, right? So it's the same class. Here's my business rules. Who am I deploying at the moment? I'm deploying Salesforce connector. So I can click that guy, click OK, click it out, brings a whole bunch of stuff down for me. I like all that, that's good. I'm just going to click next here and go publish.
So if you had previous code there, that would get updated to this new version you published.
So depending on that service tier, but basic and above, you get the ability to use the staging slots that come from that PaaS model. So I can deploy into what's called a staging slot of my API service. It's exactly the same as what we're used to with Azure websites. This notion of I have two environments, if you like, in my instance. I've got the live version that's running. I can deploy my version next into this other slot, this staging slot, and then I can swap it over. So there's very little downtime, almost no downtime to my application as I do that.
Actually, just a question on that. In regards to databases, if I go and I have two websites with different slots, but they kind of point to the same database, is there any, like, what have you had any issues with that before? Or?
Absolutely. So the question is, that's fine and well. I've got one website host. I've got two slots. I've got this live slot and I've got this staging slot. The configuration of my app are both pointing back to a production database, right? So the staging slot, from my point of view, is not really used as, okay, here's my dev version or my UAT version and here's my live version. The actual API app, let's call it the Azure web app now, that is your production version. And you've got 2 slots or up to 5 slots in that production version. So it's for swapping out different versions in production rather than trying to run different environments, pointing at different versions of the
I guess the issue I've had in the past is more related to code that's called maybe a different store procedure, and that store procedure hasn't existed yet, so I've patched it.
Yep.
So I've tried to update the database at the same time as I'm actually on the website, so that's why I was just asking.
Yeah, okay, so
They introduced, I don't know if it applies to the web apps in this concept, in this context, but Microsoft realized that was an issue with the slots in that you could deploy and ability to code, but you couldn't change the configuration to point to a different slot and different back.
Yeah, so that in the preview portal, there's a checkbox down there. You can check and it always stays the same.
Yeah, so you now have the ability to define different configuration values depending on what slot you're deploying into. So that would alleviate some of those challenges, but
Yeah.
you're always going to have an orchestration challenge when you're updating multiple tiers of a big application.
Yeah, so the issue I've had is that I've had custom code that's called the certain store procedure or something, and that hasn't existed yet until I've actually deployed that across.
Yep.
So there's been that small intermediate situation where I've had a break.
right.
So the way you can deal with that is by using feature flag in your deployment, so that when you deploy your code, you can say, don't enable this call yet because I haven't updated the database, or you can make it, aware that the store, make your store procedure that's going to change, return something different in the new store procedure, so you can tell that it's been updated. Okay, so you're always going to have any form of API. Sorry, Scott, I'm stealing.
No, it's all good. I'm just deploying anyway. So.
Any version of an API or any online system is going to have multiple tiers updated. Always probably has to have an N+1 capability to deal with updates. So you're always going to have to support the last major version you had deployed in the new version that you deploy. There's never a clean cut between last release and next release.
No, I understand. That's fine. Just
Sorry,
just because it's straight up.
You wanted magic.
Like a straight store procedure.
Yeah, so
It's
when you start, yeah, magic starts to happen when you start to use automated deployment tools where you can orchestrate some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Other than that, anything that involves a database change
Yeah, that's
is
the major
always
challenge.
a challenge.
Yeah.
Let's not talk about rollback.
No, there's no rollback option.
Yeah, exactly.
Either. So, there you go.
All right. So what I'm seeing in Visual Studio is this experience down here, this Azure App Service activity. So I've published up to my, I've published both the business rules service or the business rules API, my custom API, and I've published my SharePoint Online custom API into those respective API services that I created before.
With the slots and changing between them, say if you're in this slot at the moment, it's production and live,
Yep.
and there's some sort of session state or something that users have got, and you switch to this slot, is that going to be preserved, or will they sort of get dropped?
Look, it depends how that's set up, but I would say no, that session state's not going to be preserved unless you're using like a Reddish cache or some other solution like that.
Yeah, so if you're using some form of improp, you're going to have problems, but if you use a distributed session state, then you should be fine.
It's the same as if you load balance as well.
Yeah.
You'll have to use Redis cache to persist the session across multiple instances. So, yeah, it's the same. Like in memory in Azure, it's scary to try and use, because you're always willing to just use one instance in your website. So
Okay.
that's just something that's bit me in the butt before.
Alrighty, so we've deployed. Let's go back to Azure portal, look at my resource group. Here's my 3 app instances. Let's look at the SharePoint Online app. Now that I've deployed into here, before I start composing these services into my Logic app, it's probably a good idea to make sure it runs okay here, right? So we tested locally. Now let's test up in Azure. We do that in the same way. We have this publicly addressable endpoint. So we can hit that. Actually, this is going to fail on me, which is good because I get back this 403 forbidden, right? So it's a publicly addressable endpoint, but at the moment, by default, it's locked down, right? So users can't come and hit it. I have to actually physically grant access to my API. So as we saw before, let's go over to the settings for this API. I'll go to application settings. And what I'll do is set this access level. And I'll say, I want this to be public authenticated or public anonymous, right? So I'm going to go to public anonymous, hit save. And what I'm doing now is exposing my API at that address. So if I hit refresh, and again, I've gone /Swagger because I want to make use of this testing framework that was already there.
Swagger, I missed it. Swagger, was it a browser? How have you got /Swagger on the?
That's part of my app. So that was so ASP.NET MVC web, ASP.NET web API. There's a version cut off, but it puts all the Swagger scaffolding in for you. All you need to do is go and enable it. So
it's just part of the new
it's part of the project template. Yep. So if you want to just Google how to do that, I won't sort of walk through those steps.
It's a new way to explore the, the RESTful API.
So I've just gone /Swagger and hit that resource now. Here's my SharePoint Online connector. Here are the 2 operations that I defined for my document library resource, the get and the post. So if I put a get in and I say try it out, this is required. What document library I want? My customers document library was one of the options. Let's try it out. Hey, I got back a list of my customers. I probably should have shown you this earlier. Oh no. Is it gone? Did you close a window? No, you didn't. Okay. Here is that SharePoint site I didn't show you before, right? But I have a customer's document library and a partner's document library. So when I went and tested my API in Swagger, it's just brought back the Dixon, Burlington, and this is an internal one that SharePoint has, right? So those guys just Dixon, Burlington, blah, blah, blah. So my API is working, right? It's working up in Azure, so I'm all happy.
The authentication, is that authentication on Azure AD or is it authentication on, for example, if it was SharePoint on premise, could you use, what was the authentication?
How do you do the impersonation into SharePoint?
Yeah. So that's one of those little code blocks I didn't show you. I've actually, my custom API app is doing the authentication itself. So I've embedded the credentials in the app. I haven't exposed it as properties here. But if I was to build a reusable component that I'm going to deliver to my internal teams or sell it in this marketplace environment, I'll expose those as properties of the API where you can physically type in username and password, or the authentication options that would support.
For SharePoint here is using just the SDK, the C# SDK wrapper around the client object model.
Correct.
Client-side object model for SharePoint.
Yep. So they're all sort of SharePoint online things, which is more, in the domain of how do you build a connector for SharePoint Online, whereas what we're trying to do is just get a feel for custom connectors rather than the intricacies of talking with SharePoint. But I'm happy to answer any questions, show you the code after this. So what was I doing? I was setting this back to internal. So what does internal mean, right? If I'm going to then shut off public access, who has access to this as this API, right? So with access level of internal defined, I'm making this available to services that are running within my resource group, right? Now, if I sort of close all these guys down, oops, I've expanded. So if I close the blades down and one more, this is my resource group. And this is what's meant by internal. So only the resources in this group can now call that API. Which brings us on to our logic app. Have I missed anything? No. I'm running short of time, so let's get cracking. So here's our logic app. As you can see, it's got a similar look and feel to the other API apps that we've looked at so far. But this is not an API app. It's a special app called a logic app. So we've got slightly different properties and whatnot to go and have a look at here. Obviously, it's got operational and monitoring stuff, but this is the main one. This is the triggers and actions. So this is what launches that graphical designer that I was talking about before. So we spin this guy up and we get this designer surface. On the on this side, we have all the apps that are available to us from my resource group. So here are the apps in my resource group. So this is that concept of internal access. One of the new features that's come out after the first release was the fact that we can bring in apps from the marketplace directly from here now. So that functionality hasn't made it into the Australian tenant. It's over in the North American one. So your designer surface might look a little bit different if you stood it up over there. But it just gives you the ability to, if you haven't pre-provisioned those like I have, we can actually go off to the marketplace from here, find your app, and bring it straight in. Okay. So here's our surface, and it's going to walk us through. This is the graphical designer. I've got this code view here, and this is what we're building. And this is familiar to you from the slides, right? So we're really building up this template, but we're doing it graphically in the designer. We can go through and edit this by hand if we're, got beards and wear thongs. So we'll go back here. So we start our logic app. We need to drop a trigger. Something has to kick this guy off. Out of the box, we've got a HTTP connector that's always available to us. And that's just a protocol adapter we can use to listen on a particular endpoint or call a particular endpoint over HTTP. I'm going to use a recurrence trigger here, which means I want to run this in sort of like a batch fashion. So every X amount of, let's go through. Every minute, I want to kick off my logic app. What's wrong with a minute? Oh, my hosting plan. Great. So I plan that. So depending on the service tier,
Cost you more.
depending on your service tier, right? If you're developing and you've got the basic or the free service tiers, Microsoft don't want you spinning up stuff that's going to be consuming a whole bunch of resources. So it says, you know what? If you're on the basic tier, what's this one? Does not support 1 minute. What does it support? I think it's one every hour or something. Right?
1 day.
It's very similar to if you've ever used automation, Azure Automation or web jobs. If you're at different service tiers, you can't use that many resources. So I've got 1 hour, right? Which could be a problem. Okay, so I've created my trigger, and this is telling me now to go and add steps. Proper word should be add actions. Okay, that's the next thing in our logic app. So the first connector that we want is great, drag and drop. Really worked. I'm just going to click it, and we've got a Salesforce connector. What the beauty of the out-of-the-box connectors is it can handle things like authentication and the protocol specific requirements that you might need going against that particular application or service or whatever it is. In this case, Salesforce, right? So Salesforce wants me to authenticate using some Salesforce credentials. And I'm not logged in here, so I'm going to have to switch over to.
No one can read on the video feed anymore.
I purposely did put the password in for that, but I just hope I can remember the password. And I have had troubles with this authorization process, and I posted it on the internal groups with Microsoft, and they did a little bit of investigation, and they've actually revved a new version of the connector. Since then, I've had no trouble. So it was hit and miss whether this authentication process actually worked, but it seems to be really stable now. So it's gone really well. Okay, so I've authenticated. Now the connector is saying, okay, what sort of operation do you want to call? So what action? For this, I'm going to click the ... but you can get the gist of all the different type of actions against the entities, and I'll just want to do this execute query. And what's the query you want to execute? I'm going to just go and grab a bit of Salesforce SQL, which is, select a couple of attributes from the account where this last modified date is greater than yesterday. So I'm picking up things that have changed since yesterday. I'll plug that into here. It likes it, and away we go. Now, when I've connected this up, it says, okay, we've got this result here coming out, this body. This particular connector didn't define the schema of that JSON output, but quite a few of the connectors do. So you'll actually get to have a look at what's going to be returned there, and it'll show you all the fields that come out. So that's part of that use of the Swagger definition language to infer inputs and outputs between your different components. Right? All right, well, I'm running a little short of time, so I had planned to sort of stop there, break out, run it so we can see all the outputs, but I'm just going to continue on building this out, and I'll show you a little bit what's going on. No butter, let's go. Who doesn't mind staying an extra
It's fine, mate.
5 minutes? Yeah. So I'm going to save my logic app just there. So I've got a trigger that will kick off every hour, and I'm going to go off and call Salesforce. All right. So I'm halfway through my development. I'll close my designer. I'll go back into here, and I've got this little run now button. Okay. It looks like it actually ran, but let's run it again. So you can see in my operation and monitoring pane here, this is ticked off. So I can drill down and see what happened during this run. What's that? Let's have a look at this one. So this one called the Salesforce connector successfully. So maybe this is good enough. So here I can see a start date, an end date, a tracking ID. But what's really neat is I can look at the inputs and the outputs. So the inputs for my Salesforce action should be the output of the recurring schedule that goes and kicks it off. So this is the parameters that gets presented into that connector. And you can see these are the configuration options I did. Here's my output, and there's the JSON that I got back. And here is that result, and I didn't get any records back. Okay, not very optimal, but let's go to Salesforce. And we'll go to accounts, and I will create a new, not a new view, I want to create a new account.
Button in the middle.
Yeah, I'm not a Salesforce guy. This guy here?
No. Oh, more in the middle of the screen.
recent accounts.
This guy?
Yeah.
Great. All right. And we want to make Jackie Chan a partner.
Nice.
All right, so we've done that. Let's wait an hour and then.
That was a good one, Scott. Better than the last one.
They just keep getting better now. Let's just
How do you affect the ice with this?
let's wait for that guy just to kick off and run. Shouldn't be too long.
The manual runs exempt from the hour limitation.
I'm sorry?
It's manually running and exempt from the hour triggering limitation.
Yeah, it is. But I think they're banking on the fact that you're not going to sit there. I'm going to say sense doing this.
Hire somebody from China to do a mechanical Turk.
So I'm spending longer waiting for the portal to update than it did to run. Took like 10 seconds to run. Crap. So I wanted to show you the JSON output.
Yeah.
Okay, great. There we are. So if there's one thing I'll say about the preview portal, it is a bit sluggish. It's getting better, but a lot of resources, and it's quite sluggish. Anyway, so here's the output. Now we can see that my
What are they up to? 2 million lines of JavaScript.
adapter,
What do you expect?
adapter's gone away and brought that Salesforce. So now my next API in the flow has to consume this, right? So let's have a look at that. All right, so let's go back into our designer. And then we'll just work through to the end now. So here's our flow as we left it before. It's going off and because it's cached the credentials, so it's going off and doing the re-authentication. That's all great. The next API app was our custom business app.
Finally got your live feedback. People
Cool.
can finally see what you're doing. We've had 5 people stick with us.
It's awesome. Say hello to my family, will you? Hi, Mum.
Now, you're earning seeds on KPIs this year for sure.
All right. So with my business app, what I need to do is support the fact that I might get more than one result from Salesforce. Right. So maybe 100 accounts have changed overnight, and I need to process that. So this is where that repeating action can happen. Before I do that, I have to select the action. So I want to call my business rules, and now I'll do that. And also I want to repeat over a list. A little bit clunky, but it's saying, okay, so what list do you want to repeat over? I want to repeat over the output of the thing that just precedes me, which sometimes pops up there, but this one doesn't. So let's go back to our snippet. I'll show you this. This references the API app that in my flow, and it's called Salesforce Connector, and I'm looking at the body, so the output of that. And we saw in our JSON before that we had a collection called results, and then a collection called records within that, and that's what I want to repeat over. So I'll punch that into there, and now we should, through that inference, come up with, no, we don't, it's lying to me. So this is the clunkiness of a version 1 product, right? It's not giving me that IntelliSense in all cases. So from that repeated item, I want to look at the type attribute. So part of the JSON that came back was the account type, and the other one was the account name.
Is this the expression language?
Yeah, the app little bit is, yeah. So app is like a reference. So I'm referencing the repeating item that I set up here, and that was down into that collection. So I'm at the item level of the collection, so give me the name.
Is it like Razor?
It uses an at sign.
It's nowhere. it's nowhere near functional. It's not like Razor. There's no object model backing it in that respect. Yeah, it's yet another expression language we have to learn.
At sign instead of.
That's Yale. Yale.
Yale.
Yet another expression language.
Should tell the team that, maybe they'll pick it.
Yeah.
And then people ask why they call it Yale.
Yeah. So here's a classic example where I am now getting a bit of IntelliSense and a bit of inference, right? So my customer, not the one Microsoft developed, but the one I developed, is giving us a lot more information. So I'm going to call my business rules. I'm going to send in the type and the name, as we tested on premise, as we saw in that Swagger UI, and it's going to return to me this structure that we saw before. Everything in this logic app is JSON based, right? So it's inputs and outputs is JSON based, the template's JSON based. So we're moving outside of a world of where everything used to be XML within Microsoft. Now we're really moving into this more lightweight JSON based stuff. Okay, so I've created that guy. The last guy to put in is going to be my SharePoint Online connector. And he's going to sit in behind there. I'm running out of real estate. There we go. He's got to pick the right bar, don't you? I want to call the post. Remember, I had two operations. Here's my post. There's my document library. Again, now I'm going to be repeating over repeating. So I'm sort of going down the rabbit hole, right? So Salesforce is going to give me a bunch of accounts, a collection of accounts. My business rule is going to run once for every account. And then my Salesforce connector API wants to run for every time the business rules run, right? So I'm repeating, or iterating over those repeating items. So let's do that, repeat over a list. I'll quickly go and grab that, which just is my business rule service outputs for these items. Bit scared it doesn't have an at sign on it. Oh, look at that. Again, it was the custom API was well written. Let's just make sure it's the right one though. No, it's not. So I want to do repeat item output document library, repeat item output folder name. So these are just parameters to my API. Hit OK. Good, it validates, everything looks all right. So we're looking pretty good now. Quick look at the code designer view. So this is the template I've built out. This is the guy that goes into source control, right? So I can quickly redeploy, and if I need any environmental variables, I can put it up here in parameters. All right, so I'm going to hit save. Oh. Yeah, it's that actions one, right?
You're missing out something.
Yeah. Hello.
This is how you smash spacecraft into Mars by missing out signs.
Using quotes and you meant double quotes.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Using miles instead of kilometres,
Yeah.
vice versa. No wonder the
You
Rosetta
didn't
lander
tick it.
just woke up. They probably
Well-
said
well
sleep for
found
5
out.
minutes and slept for 5 months.
So you never know whether it's the designer who's laggy or it's me being impatient. Success. So it successfully passed it. All right.
So you can't do any of this designer stuff in Visual Studio.
No, but I've been calling for it, and many other people are. So it's well and truly in the pipeline.
What about resource management around this? Is it going to be in place, or is it already in place? Or?
Yeah, I can show you that after.
Okay.
How that's sort of coming into Server Manager pane on Visual Studio.
Okay.
Right, let's run it. Let's have a look. Okay, so in Salesforce, Jackie Chan's a technology partner, and his friend, Chuck Norris Crap, is also a technology partner. Let's change that, just so we can see something different. So he can be a direct customer because he's Chuck Norris.
He finds you.
He's probably already in there. That's how good Chuck is, right? All right, let's just good. Oh, Jackie's already there because it kicked off, no doubt, after I saved it. So that would have been the 801 run. So you can see here's the monitoring of what happened. This will be the interesting one. Look at the Salesforce connector. Look at the inputs. And this will be everything that the business rules engine gave to us, which was partner Jackie Chan. And then the output is what, yeah, so there's the input. This is the output of the last action, right? So that's not that important. Let's just give this another run right now. Oh God, that's worked. Isn't that amazing? So we should see, and if I, wasn't sitting here talking most of the time, how hitting refresh, and there's Chuck. Look at that. So we've put up in this, hour and a bit session, Salesforce and Office 365 just using these out-of-the-box connectors, right? And if I wasn't so stingy about which of the out-of-the-box connectors I needed, I probably could have wired this up without doing any code. If I just wanted to create a document library instead of a folder in a document library, I could have done away with my business rules and that sorts of things. But yeah, it's very quick to build these sorts of things. We can always break down into custom code. It's managed for us. We get a lot of out-of-the-box management, and as you can see, visibility and operations, a whole bunch of stuff. So it's truly running our applications, our APIs as a service up in Windows Azure. So going back to the deck, and I promise I haven't got any more jokes. Oh, I do, but but yeah, let's call it a night, huh?
So can you go away tonight then and integrate Xero and people's leave requests within Kloud and integrate it with a cloud resource management tool?
Well, I did that last night, but not for the sales guys, because you guys are special. Yeah. All right, thanks guys for your attention, and sorry it ran a little bit late, but yeah. Any questions? Come up, have a chat. Feel free to have a look at the code, that sort of stuff.
We got the most online viewers we've ever had as well. It's just a shame that we weren't available to or able to get the screen share to work for the whole evening. That's all right. Look,
Fantastic.
Yeah, we'll wrap it up there. I think Scott showed yet again why integration guys love it when a text file appears magically in a folder on a server on the other side of the organization, by showing us how you can get excited about pulling records out of Salesforce and creating folders in SharePoint. But
as long as you look at the JSON.
Yeah, but I think it's good to see this sort of stuff, and I think it's been a little bit lost, despite the fact there was a big announcement from Microsoft about this, where Scott Guthrie got up and talked about this as the next wave of where Azure is going, and that kind of helps, I guess, put some meat around microservices in the Azure space at least. We'll see where BizTalk Services goes, I guess, as part of that. It's going to be a big transformation. But that's it. Thanks a lot for coming along tonight, guys. Look, Scott will be here. I'll be here if you want to ask any questions, but we'll wrap it up there. Thanks a lot for guys who watched online. We lost 2 of them in the last 30 seconds. They didn't like my joke about integration, obviously. Thank you very much for coming. Hopefully we'll see you next month. Next month, we'll have Evening with Troy Hunt, who'll be coming and talking to us about his experiences in running. Have you been pawned on, or pwned? Have you been pwned on? Yes, not pawned. Have you been pwned on Azure? and just general web app security as well. So it should be a good evening. That'll be announced probably in the next week or so. Thanks a lot for coming.
Cheers, thanks guys.
Thank you.